This is Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. Over this half hour, we are going to be speaking with several deputy district attorneys from the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. We thank the elected DA Paul Zellerbach for sending some of his finest to our program. We start with Rick Myshak, who focuses on real estate fraud, which sadly has become epidemic, endemic throughout the Inland Empire and California. Sir, we know that the Inland Empire is ground zero for the foreclosure crisis, and that has led to several instances of real estate fraud. In the broadest sense, what do you see day in and day out?
Well, I think in the broadest sense, what we see is a place that is ripe for scam artists to prey on vulnerable individuals who are in a real desperate situation where they're behind in their mortgages, they're looking at a foreclosure, getting that notice of default in the mail saying that, you know, you're behind in your payments, we're going to evict you eventually. Sure. And then they are inundated with mail from folks who are promising to save them from foreclosure, to modify their loan for them. And unfortunately, most of these mailers that they get are from people who will not be able to save it. They're just there to take these folks' money and take off
now,
with it.
There is some good news because, as you know, the California legislature recently passed and the governor signed the Homeowners Bill of Rights. And so hopefully that will provide some relief. But that being said, it is still a very treacherous path to take when you are facing foreclosure. I want to talk about some of the scams that you see and offer our audience some tips, some ideas on how to avoid these scams. Oftentimes, some of these scammers, I guess we'll call them, will ask for advanced fees to assist with a modification, an attempted modification. Are those permissible?
They're not. They're actually illegal, and it doesn't matter if it's a loan modification or a foreclosure rescue. Either way, the law says that these advance fees are illegal. They cannot collect the fees until a service is performed, and that's really what the big red flag is. If you've got one of these companies and they're promising the world to you, but they need money up front to get things started, that should be an automatic red flag that it's not legit.
So when are services performed? At what point, how do they make their money legitimately?
Well, that is a gray area. The law is always open to interpretation.
Oh, yes.
We at our office, when we're looking at whether or not we're going to charge somebody criminally with something like this, we'll look factually at how much they have performed. Has there been an actual effort to try and get these folks' loan modified, or was it simply putting together a file and then they called it services performed? It's kind of a smell test, if you will, where if it doesn't smell right, then chances are it's just not legit.
If we think that we are a victim of this type of real estate fraud, what should we do if we live in Riverside County or otherwise?
Sure. Probably the best thing to do would be to contact law enforcement, and either your local police agency or your district attorney's office in your county is usually the office that's handling it. Also, the Department of Real Estate has taken a very aggressive approach to these types of scams. And unfortunately, lawyers themselves have gotten into this business. And if you,
oh, those lawyers.
Yeah.
I'm one of them, so are you. But I don't practice, you do. Anyway.
But if you are being assisted by a lawyer, then contacting the state bar is also being very aggressive.
But here's the challenge. I mean, if you are facing foreclosure, who can pay for a lawyer?
Somehow they can. These advance fees, you'd be surprised, go anywhere from $1,000 to up to, I've seen $12,000 to $15,000 to save a house from foreclosure, which begs the question, why isn't that money being used towards the mortgage? But
I faced a situation recently, and it's one that I know you're facing. It's the following. Our nanny, who is more loved by our children than I am, is a renter. And she received a notice on her door that the property had been foreclosed upon. And as a lawyer myself, although this is not my area, tried to do everything I could to help her. It became a huge morass. Fannie Mae was involved, Freddie was involved, there were lawsuits. It was a mess. And the point is, you're there to help. I should have called you when this mess was presented before us.
Yeah, rent skimming is also one of the most common things we're seeing right now. Riverside County has one of the highest foreclosure rates in the state. What happens is you have a lot of abandoned homes. You have a lot of people who are either former owners of the properties, but actually more commonly people who have no ownership interest or tie to the property.
I want to talk about the squatters in a second.
Okay.
But let's go to that first element where
Right.
you're a renter. You're paying your rent.
Right.
You have no idea the property's in distress, and then you get this notice,
Right.
which says you're being evicted. This property has been foreclosed upon. What?
Right. Well, the owner does have an obligation to tell you if they're not paying the mortgage, and it is illegal to collect rent and not pay the mortgage if the mortgage is less than a year old. Now, if it's past a year old, it's not criminal, but you can still pursue a civil avenue. But like you said, there's the problem of, okay, you have a right to sue the landlord for...
Is that true? So let's say, could our nanny have gone to you and said, this is what happened? Would you have, is that a criminal matter against her landlord?
Depends on how old the mortgage is.
I understand.
If the mortgage is less than a year old, you could do that. If it's more than a year old, criminally, there's not a lot of avenues. You'd have to pursue the civil route.
Let's talk about squatters.
Okay.
I know I have too many personal scenarios, but I have a friend who the house next door to them was foreclosed upon, and all of a sudden, there are people living there.
Right.
And they're dealing drugs. And this is in a beautiful neighborhood.
People, if you think about it, when people go to rent a property, how many people will actually go do a title search to see if their landlord is the true owner of the property
Right.
or a legitimate representative? We don't typically do that when we're renting a property. So we have a lot of people in Riverside County right now that are renting properties from people who don't own the property, don't have an interest in the property, and have no right to rent that property.
So that's even separate from just squatters showing up in foreclosed properties. I mean,
Correct.
this is even more sinister if you ask me.
Correct. No, the rent skimming is. I mean, we do see some squatters. We do see people just living in homes,
Right.
and taking advantage of that.
Think about the audacity. You pretend to be a landlord of a foreclosed upon property.
We have cases pending where some of these scam artists were making up to $30,000 a month. They were renting literally
How do you
25,
find out
30
about
properties.
these?
Well, the particular case I have is actually quite interesting. The way we found out about it was the particular scam artist got a little lazy and he didn't check to see if one of the properties he was renting was actually foreclosed on. It happened to be owned by an Air Force reservist who was overseas serving a tour. He came back to find people living in his home and called police.
And as I understand it, Air Force, they're exempt from foreclosure.
Right. Well, not only that, I mean, he's exempt from even paying his mortgage for a certain period
Right.
of time while he's overseas. And he came back and there were people living in his house. And when he confronted them and called the police, they said...
The people had no idea.
No.
Right.
We rented it from this guy, this landlord. And it turned out that he was renting these properties all over the Hemet San Jacinto area.
What's happening to him?
Well, that case is still pending.
It is pending, so you cannot say.
Right.
Final tips, thoughts, comments, ideas, notions, protections?
Yeah, I think that no matter whether you're renting a property, whether you're dealing with a foreclosure and you're trying to have someone assist you, get a copy of your contract in writing.
Right.
Get a contract, get it in writing, get a copy of it. Don't pay anything up front in terms of the foreclosure stuff. If you're renting a property, these days as a renter, you need to be much more diligent in making sure that the person you're renting from actually has some interest in the property. And there are little things you can do. You don't have to do a full title search to the property. You can take a look at the lock. Has it been recently changed? That can be a red flag because most of these people don't have locks to the property, so they get the locks changed.
Interesting.
Go talk to a neighbor. Ask the neighbor, hey, has anyone been living here? Do you know who owns this property? Do a few little things. If it seems kind of suspicious or hokey, then chances are that there's a problem, yeah.
Rick Mychok, we thank you for joining us. He is a deputy DA in Riverside County. When we come back, we'll be speaking with a couple of your colleagues who are dealing with elder abuse. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.
In 2010, which California metropolitan area faced the highest crime ranking? In 2010, Oakland faced the highest crime rate ranking in California. Detroit saw the highest rate in the United States.
Charter California edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us today. Some very important information being provided thanks to the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. We appreciate the DA Paul Zellerbach sending two of his finest deputy district attorneys to our program. We have Sarah Stockwell, Jenna Hasagawa. They are DAs, deputy DAs specializing in elder abuse. It is just disheartening to think that here we are in the 21st century. We are facing elder abuse. My parents, I guess, are considered elderly. They're in their 70s. And so we all have parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents. We're so concerned about them. So I want to start with you, Janet, and talk about elder abuse in a kind of a traditional framework. What are you saying in terms of elder abuse? And I'm thinking about physical neglect.
We see a lot of cases that are similar to the dynamics of domestic violence.
Right.
We often see families that have suffered domestic violence in that the spouses were abusive towards each other, whether it was emotionally or physically. And then once a spouse passes on, we see the surviving spouse sometimes being abused by a child or a grandchild, physically as well as financially.
And so what can you do? What can we do to try to prevent that cycle from repeating? Or if it's a new cycle, to stop it in its tracks?
Well, first of all, being able to acknowledge it. Because so many times I see that family members are keeping it hidden, are keeping that family secret hidden. And I learn as I'm investigating the case that neighbors knew about it, church members, other people in the community, and they kept it secret as well.
And we've heard the term child protective services. There's also adult protective services. And there is a hotline that we can call if we're a neighbor, if we're a family member, if we have any suspicion that something may be going on. We don't want to be alarmist, but you know what I'm getting at, Janet.
Yes.
How can we call that line?
You can call 1-800-491-7123, and that is to the Adult Protective Services here in Riverside County.
And I'm sure if you're not in Riverside County, you call that number, they'll refer you somehow, some way. I mean,
Absolutely.
we are one big state that will help each other regardless of which county we are in. There's also, and we'll get to you in a moment, Sarah, there's also the more subtle abuse where someone may knock at the door, call someone, you know, you've won $1 million, or, you know, we want to help you with the next big investment.
These are what we call scams. They come in many different forms. The ones that you're talking about when people are knocking at your door, sometimes they're coming to tell you that they've known you from a long time ago,
Right.
and they're distracting you so that somebody else can have access to your valuables, and then they usually work in pairs.
That could be theft. That's traditional theft.
Absolutely. Then there's a construction fraud kinds of scams where somebody's going to say, oh, you know, we were just in the neighborhood, we have this extra material, we'll give you a really good deal, you know, how about you sign up today? And they want all the money up front. That's a scam as well. There are certain rules that need to be complied with. There are other types of scams that particularly target people who are homebound, such as the phone scams or the telemarketing, as well as the mail scams. And
Email scams too.
Yes, we do see a lot
Coming
of
from
that.
Nigeria, Kenya, wherever
Yes.
it may be.
You should not be having to send any money if you've won anything. And if you have never entered a lottery or a sweepstake, then you didn't win it.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to turn to you, Sarah, and talk about a fraud that is just so devastating, and it can really destroy lives like none other. These are isolated incidents, but this can really turn someone's life around in ways we could never imagine. And that deals with life insurance policies, annuities. In the most basic level, just tell our audience, what's an annuity?
Sure. Well, an annuity is a type of insurance product. I've heard people compare it to like a private pension in a way. So what you do is you either use a lump sum payment and buy an annuity, or you make periodic payments. And then there's a set term of years that you wait until you will get the annuity to pay out. So typically we'll see somebody will give a lump sum of, for example, $500,000. They wait for 10 years, and then after the 10 years, they'll start receiving monthly payments, usually accruing interest over that 10 years.
Of course. So let's talk about the unscrupulous use of annuities.
Yes.
Please.
Sure. Well, what we've been seeing a rise of since about the early 2000s was annuities have some of the highest commissions for agents. And so there was a lot of push from a lot of the annuities, insurance companies to sell these annuities. And so what was happening and is still happening were these unscrupulous agents were selling annuities that were unsuitable, specifically and most notably towards seniors. So for example, you'd have salesmen selling a 10-year annuity to an 85-year-old victim, and they couldn't touch the majority of that money. And in a lot of cases, they put their entire retirement into that annuity and weren't able to touch it without substantial penalties.
Prepayment penalties.
Absolutely, or early withdrawal penalties.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So,
that would be the term, of course.
Exactly. So what the Department of Insurance started doing is really cracking down. They've been really instrumental in adding new laws to the books to help change that and target those types of crimes.
What about the reverse mortgage? I've been seeing a lot of ads for that on the air. It does seem like a decent mechanism to increase revenue for seniors on a fixed income, but I gotta think there's some shaky stuff going on. Am I wrong?
Well, I don't deal with that specifically. However, where we were seeing problems with the reverse mortgages directly related to annuities, where a lot of salesmen were convincing seniors to take out reverse mortgages on their home with the incentive, oh, look, you'll have all this extra money, then they were telling them to use the proceeds from the reverse mortgage to purchase an annuity. So the whole point of the reverse mortgage, to have cash available, was now taken away because it was tied up in an annuity. So they actually are related, and the laws actually just changed to add more protection when a senior wants to get a reverse mortgage in an annuity.
What about the notion that because the brokers are able to get such high commissions, they'll churn annuities?
Yes.
Explain that.
Sure. Churning or twisting has become a big problem. So some people will have legitimate annuities they bought when earlier on, so maybe they were 60, it would make sense to start paying out when they were 70. Well, some of these agents will convince them and be very convincing and will say, oh, you know what, that annuity's not working for you like this new product that I have. So they'll convince them to cash in a perfectly fine existing annuity, take out all that money, and then put it into a new annuity. But the problem is, it starts an entire new term where they can't touch their money. So whereas the 60-year-old would have been getting their money at 70, now they're not getting it for another 10 years past that.
What can we do to protect our parents, our grandparents, ourselves?
Absolutely. Well, California has specific laws in place dealing with annuities and protections for seniors. For example, an agent cannot just show up at your door saying, oh, I'm driving through the neighborhood, I thought that I would stop in and see you. They have to give you 24-hour written notice that they are going to come see you and that it will be a sales presentation. In terms of being aware, we also encourage, when Janet and I go out and do outreach, we always encourage seniors to have a trusted friend or family member or even a trusted neighbor to sit in with them, because the more people you have, first of all, the more witnesses you have if it ever gets to us.
What's interesting is that when we buy cars, I think there's a 3-day period whereby we can unwind the transaction. It's the same with annuities, is that right?
Yes.
Even better?
Yeah, for seniors there's a 30-day, what's called a 30-day free look period, where you have the right to cancel your annuity. The problem is that if you've already cashed out an investment like a CD, you may have already taken penalties on that. So even though you do get the 30 days to return it, you might have tax consequences or even lost money when you cashed in an investment.
But the good news is, let's say you are an adult and your parent is in their 70s and you find out about this. Within 30 days, you can try to unwind the transaction and we'll have some success.
Yes.
If we suspect that we have been, our parents, our grandparents, aunts, uncles are the subject of annuity fraud, what can we do?
Well, the first step we recommend people do is call the Department of Insurance. Their number is 1-800-927-HELP, H-E-L-P.
And it's that simple?
Yes.
And then would the matter be trickle down to your office, or would the DOI prosecute? How would it work?
Well, what they do is they will refer it to the local office. For Riverside, our local office is in Rancho Cucamonga.
I see.
They will refer it to an investigator there. Traditionally, the investigators for the Department of Insurance, they have law enforcement investigators sign there. They investigate the case and send it to our office for prosecution.
I want to thank you both for what you're doing for the seniors of Riverside County in California. Her name is Janet Hasagawa. Her name is Sarah Stockwell. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. So glad you're with us today. We are joined by Debbie Anderson. She also works in the District Attorney's Office of Riverside County. She is a Victims Services Supervisor and Coordinator for Family Justice Centers. They sound like such an amazing place. They sound like oases.
They
Tell us
are.
about them.
The Family Justice Center, the conception of it was a one-stop shop for crime victims. So they go to this facility and service providers go there to give the victims their services. It would prevent victims from going around to 2 or 3 different
Right.
agencies and trying to locate where the services are. We're all under one roof.
But let's talk about these victims, because you really are looking at a subset of people who are victims in a way like none other. I mean, it's one thing to be a victim of a crime perpetrated by a stranger. Horrible, devastating. But when the perpetrator of that crime is a family member,
Right.
there's a whole host of issues that get bottled up.
Correct.
And really unique circumstances for the victim and the service provider. So talk to us about your clients.
Well, primarily they were started with domestic violence, so that would be any family violence. In Riverside County, we were big thinking, so we've expanded it to sexual assault, adult and child, physical child abuse, and elder abuse. So the dynamics that we're dealing with, if it's someone in the family, of course, a lot of times we have uncooperative victims at first. They don't want anything to happen to their family member.
course.
They're usually not the one that's called the police, or if they are, it may be a few days down the line and they're hesitant about, reliving what happened. So the advocates that work with them have to be really good at their interviewing skills and real empathetic to their situation, and they are. They all know about the cycle of violence, and they're all trained domestic violence counselors, so they're very patient. And we always say the victims may come to us more than one time, but you keep saying the same information. It may not be the first time or the 10th time, but one of those times it's going to click and we're going to be able to make some progress.
So in Riverside County, there are 2 family justice centers right now.
Currently operating.
The good news is there will be another one at the
Yes.
end of this year in Indio in the Coachella
Right.
Valley. But let's talk about the 2,
Okay.
the 2 locations that are oasis for these families, one in Riverside, one in Murrieta.
Right.
When you walk in to a family justice center, what are you going to see?
They're very welcoming environments. The lobbies look like living rooms. They call them soft interview rooms, so it's a friendly environment. So they're greeted by our clerical staff, and what they do is they're given a form to fill out, kind of a needs assessment, because we want to know the whole story about what we really can help them with. We're not really sure when they walk in what the situation is.
Have they been referred?
Yes.
So it's referred by law enforcement?
Many are law enforcement, many are hospitals, schools
really?
refer them.
Oh, so
Some people
that's-
at the courts, we get a lot of referrals from family law courts. So they can come from a variety of different
Okay,
ways.
so they walk in, it's a
Right.
welcoming environment.
And they're greeted, and then when they turn their paperwork in, a needs assessment will be done by the advocate that will see them to see what really they're here for, whether they need a restraining order, whether they need to be relocated, do they have emergency needs of housing or food or clothing, things like that are monetary needs. They kind of do a whole needs assessment like that. At the same time, they're doing a threat assessment to see what kind of danger they're actually in. Have they already been contacted by the police? Did they report the violence? We know where they actually are. Do they need to go into a shelter? So it's a whole realm that we're looking at holistically.
And so what happens? They've had the intake form, they've filled it out, then what happens? Is there then another room that they go to?
Yes.
A welcoming,
Yes.
loving, supportive?
Those are the little soft interview rooms, and they're all set up, and the victim will stay there with their children. We also have in both centers really nice children's rooms, kind of adjacent to where they are, so the kids will have a place to go play, watch videos, have toys and things like that while the parents are
No,
getting
these
their
are not
services.
residential facilities.
No.
But I would presume that through the intake, it may be that you are making references
Yes.
to residential facilities.
Many times they need to be out of their situation immediately, so we work hand in hand with our other community partners, the 2 shelters that we have in our county already. We work hand in hand with them, and we have a referral source where we can get them.
And when we think about domestic violence, the first thing that comes to our mind is spousal abuse.
Correct.
But that's not only what you're focused upon. You're focused upon child abuse, elder abuse, which to me is amongst the most deplorable
Right.
around,
Right.
especially when so many of these elderly individuals may have diminished capacity. And so talk to us about how you handle not so much the spousal abuse, because that it feels like we know what to do, But the child abuse, the elder abuse.
And a lot of times with child abuse, we get referrals from Child Protective Services
Right.
because many times the parents are the perpetrators.
Exactly.
So we have to try to really narrow path that we deal with that. We don't deal with any defendants. So if the parents are the perpetrators or defendants, we don't have contact with them. We deal with social workers. And we provide the same things for the children. If they need to get to counseling, we'll apply for victims' compensation for them. If they need to, have other services that CPS can't offer them, we'll see if we can find them.
Are you making references to foster care if necessary?
CPS does that part of it.
But you are the middle
Yes.
the middle ground.
We work hand in hand with all the community agencies. And as far as elder abuse, many times it's their caretakers or it could be a family member, their kids
Right.
or, that are taking care of them. So they're very hesitant to come forward and say anything. So each area has an advocate that works specifically with elder abuse. Even though the Desert one doesn't have a family justice center yet, we still have an elder abuse advocate.
One would hope. I mean, when you think about the Coachella Valley,
Yes,
there's a
yes.
good number of elderly residents.
Right.
I understand that in Riverside County, these centers only opened in the last 5-7 years.
Correct.
Is this a trend throughout the state of California? Are you aware?
Yes, it was. Actually, San Diego was the very first one in California to open, and it went nationwide. They were on Oprah Winfrey Show, and so they
wow.
kind of caught on about how important really the family violence was. And so we applied for a grant way back at the beginning in 2004.
Oh, sure.
RD at the time, Grover Trask, we tried to get a federal grant, and because San Diego was so close to Riverside County, we weren't given the grant.
Oh, no.
But he was committed to doing some progress, and he said we're going to go forward whether or not. So he put his money where his mouth was, and he thought even bigger than that. San Diego has one in the city of San Diego with one police department, and he wanted them regionally because we're so big. He wanted 3, and we wanted to work with all the police agencies, sheriff's department, and all the city polices. So that was how we opened up the
first one.
Riverside in March of 2005.
Right.
And Riverside Police Department has staff in there with us, the Detective Bureau, since day
the
one.
city.
The city police.
What about county?
We at one time had sheriff's department in there with us. They're no longer housed there all the time, but they can come into the
Of course.
facility and do their interviews and things like
And then
that.
in Murrieta, same situation?
Same things, yeah. We have had sheriff's department out there, and actually sheriff's department is a partner out there. They have a grant now where they do have one sheriff's detective and an
Now,
advocate.
how are you getting funding for the center in Indio? I mean, these are tough fiscal times.
It's coming. Our DA is committed to, our new DA, Paul Zellerbach, he's committed
Right.
to it also. And so we're finding ways to do with, I'm not sure where the funding's
It's
coming
coming.
from, but it's coming.
But I would also presume that in the end, of course, we're dealing with people, but I have to think there's some cost savings. I mean, if it is a one-stop shop like you described,
Right.
it really will become more efficient.
Well, and hopefully by us all being there working as a team with the victim, it's going to make some progress because the prosecution is very, very costly.
Of course.
Just the investigators going out and doing all their investigation and coming to our office having charges filed, and it's really expensive. So we can intervene. It's going to be cost savings for everybody.
And for better or for worse, you are serving thousands.
Thousands.
Talk to us about that. How many thousands per year, for example?
In 2011, we served over 5,700 victims in just those 2 centers.
I
So-
mean, it's more than we want, but at least we know
Right.
that there is somewhere that they can go where
Right.
they will not feel intimidated by walking into a police station. It is a welcoming oasis.
And what I really want to stress to everybody, now that I'm going out in the community a lot doing this, I wanted to just let everybody know that we can help victims whether or not, if the investigation is still ongoing, it's not completed, we can still help victims. Whether or not we have a suspect, many times in a sexual assault case for a rape case, we don't have a suspect. We can still help that victim.
Can you self-refer?
Yes, you can.
See, that's special, that if you
Yes.
feel like you need support,
Yes.
there's somewhere you can go. In our final moments, Debbie, what has this meant for you? I mean, you must go to sleep at night feeling really good.
This is it is rewarding. We don't do it for the personal satisfaction,
But still.
doing it all these years, you really know. People ask me all the time, how can you do this? It's so depressing. But you see the progress.
Isn't it the reverse in a way?
It is. Sometimes you see families get situated, they get their jobs, they're living on their own, they're happy, the kids are happy in school, doing well, and it's really rewarding.
Debbie Anderson, you are one of the angels of
thank
Riverside
you.
County. I thank you for joining us. She is the coordinator of Family Justice Centers run through the District Attorney's Office of Riverside County. That's Paul Zellerbach. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.